these WebEx and all is tough to figure out how to work. Thank you,
Okay,
though. Thank you for being patient.
so I'll start the session. On behalf of Central Zoo Authority, I welcome you back to another episode of Zooming Conservation, where we dive into the deep world of wildlife and the efforts made to preserve our planet. I'm your host Apurva, and today we have a very special episode in honor of World Crocodile Day that is celebrated on 17th June. World Crocodile Day is the global event aimed at raising awareness about the flight of crocodiles and their habitat. These magnificent reptiles have been around for millions of years, yet today, many of the species face significant threats from habitat loss, illegal hunting, and climate change. Crocodiles have often been misunderstood and feared, yet they play a very crucial role in our ecosystem. Our focus for today's episode is on captivating world of crocodiles. To help us explore the fascinating details of this incredible creature, we are honored to have Mr. Ajay Karthik with us. Mr. Ajay Karthik is curator of reptiles at Green Zoological Rescue and Rehabilitation Center in Jamnagar, Gujarat. With several years of experience of working with reptiles in both zoo and field projects across the country, he brings a wealth of knowledge and passion to our discussion today. Ajay, I welcome you to Zooming Conservation. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'll just
Thank you for having me. Thanks for the very kind introduction. So this is sorry about the delay, everybody, but some technical challenges were there from my end. If you could just move to the second slide, please. I forgot to edit the. Yeah, that we'll start from there. Thanks. So thank you everyone for your patience. There was some delay in starting this, but today is just in recognition of World Crocodile Day. I'd like to do a brief session for everybody on the behavioral ecology of crocodiles. This is not a very uh, technical session per se. It's just to gain some understanding of the species of crocodiles that exist and some of the some of their unique behavioral features. It's very simple. Most of you already know as much as I do, if not more. So if it seems like it's very simplistic, I apologize in advance. So basically, just for you all to understand, I'm not a paleontologist, but this is a family tree of the early crocodilian ancestors. So they evolved from pseudosuchia, which are croc-line archosaurs, and then they slowly separated into early crocodile relatives and crocodile-like relatives. The crocodiliforms were the primitive crocodilians, and from there, basically, they split into four further groups: theropod-like crocs, armored herbivorous crocs, which is very interesting, Eusuchia, which are true crocodilians, and Thalattosuchia, which are marine crocodiles, which is a very scary prospect. But thankfully, these are all prehistoric animals. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So presently speaking, there have been taxonomic changes ongoing in crocodiles. As of the minute, there are 26 species recognized across the world, and they are split into two broad families. So one family are family Alligatoridae, which is the alligators and caiman. There's two species of alligators found across the world: the American and the Chinese alligator, and six species of caimans. Caimans are restricted to the New World, which is to say the Americas. So caiman are what are referred to as New World crocodilians. There are six species of caiman found across the world: spectacled broad-snouted Yakare caiman, black caiman, Cuvier's, and Schneider's dwarf caiman. Next slide, please. So alligators and caiman are not what are considered true crocodiles. The true crocodiles instead belong to the family Crocodilidae, and there are three genera of species, three genuses found in this subfamily. One of them is the genus Mecistops. It currently has two species. There's a newly recognized species there as well. The African slender-snouted crocodile has been split into the West and Central African slender-snouted crocodile. Taxonomic work is ongoing in the genus Osteolaemus, and that soon will be split into three other species. But as of now, we consider it as one species. And the genus Crocodilus, which has the American crocodile, Orinoco crocodiles, freshwater crocodiles, among others. These are what are considered your prototypical crocodilians: broad snout, uh, large, medium to large animals with broad dietary preferences and a very wide range of habitat preferences. Next slide, please. These are the outliers. These two species are the outliers because they fall under the family Gavialidae, and they are more specialized crocodilians with elongate, slender snouts, geared towards mostly a fish-eating lifestyle. Though the Tomistoma is much more wide in its dietary preferences, these are not considered true crocodiles per se. Though very interesting species, they're not true crocodilians. Next slide, please. So this is a very interesting distribution of extant crocodilians. You can It's pretty obvious. You can see that they are mostly equatorial and sub-equatorial animals. You have very few species that are too far uh, above or below the equatorial belt. The areas demarcated in red, those are the range of crocodiles. The areas demarcated in green are alligators and caiman, and the areas in blue are the true alligators. Now, interestingly enough, there's only one place in the world where the distribution of alligators and crocodiles overlaps. That's in parts of Florida where the American alligator and the American crocodile coexist. But otherwise, mostly crocodiles are separated either by habitat or by distribution and range of the species itself. Next, please. So, crocodile taxonomy as such is very difficult and cumbersome to do on live animals. But just so everybody has an idea, we can look at some of the basic features. So, crocs have a bunch of osteoderms on the dorsal side of the body, and some of they're called dorsal scutes. Some species have post-occipital scutes. Almost all species have a nuchal shield, and all of them have dorsal and lateral scutes. And the belly of the crocodile, where they have ventral scales, there are several transverse rows of ventral scales, and they are counted between the collar, which is basically just below the neck, and to the vent. The vent is where they uh, where they defecate from. So counting the transverse number of belly scales will often give you an indication of what species of crocodile it is. So if imagine if you had to do that on a live animal, you have to take a crocodile and make it go ulta, which is easier said than done. This method was actually developed because crocodiles, for many years, there's been a lot of illegal trade in their skins. So to be able to identify the source of the skin, this method was developed. So it's not something that's actually very highly functional on live animals unless they are like sedated for a prolonged period of time. Next, please. So yeah, we saw the three extant families, and the fundamental morphological difference between the three is that Alligatoridae have rounded U-shaped snouts, and true crocodilians have broad tapering V-shaped snouts, and Gavialidae, which is the gharial and the Tomistoma, have rather uh, slender, elongate snouts. They are specialized for a fish-eating diet. Alligators and caiman typically tend to have an overbite, which is to say that their teeth don't interlock like in a grid pattern. Whereas in most true crocodiles, you can see the teeth interlock in a grid pattern, and the fourth tooth on either side of the lower jaw sticks out. It doesn't have a slot in the upper jaw. So, apart from see you later and see you in a while, this is a very easy way to differentiate between the two families. Next slide, please. So depending on the species of crocodilian, they have between 60 to 110 teeth. The teeth are not really sharp per se in adult animals. They are designed more to grip onto the prey rather than chew or to cut. So crocodiles don't really chew their food. They break off as large as pieces as they can, using just the immense jaw pressure they exert, and also by thrashing around, moving their neck. And they swallow pieces pretty much whole. The narrow-snouted species, the gharial, the tomistoma, the African slender-snouted crocodiles have fairly sharp teeth, but that's because they need to be able to hold on to fish which are quite slippery, and so their teeth are designed more to like pierce the prey. Whereas, but large crocodiles like the saltwater crocodile in the image, the teeth are conical and meant to exert a lot of pressure. Crocodilians exert the most bite force at the back of the mouth. So the teeth at the back of the mouth are more rounded and conical and not even as sharp as the teeth you can see in front of the mouth. But big crocodiles are biting with almost 1,500 to 2,000 kilos per square inch of pressure. That's unmatched by any other animal you can think of. Even animals that are known for strong bite forces like hyenas and all register hardly one third or a quarter of the bite force that a large Nile crocodile or a saltwater crocodile can. Next, please. Uh, so crocodiles, all of you already know, they're essentially like almost semi-aquatic or fully aquatic predators. So they have a lot of morphological features that help them to be aquatic ambush predators. So this particular image you're seeing right now is of maybe like a 10-foot marsh crocodile. And this animal is exposing maybe 1/10 of its total body length. It's got less than a foot of its body outside of the water. But as you can see, all its key sensory organs, which is to say the eyes, ears, and the nostrils, are all exposed from the water, while a very small part of the body is actually visible to animals or potential prey items. So, and all of these sense organs are located along one plane of the skull. And the eyes themselves, even in very, very, very big crocodiles, are very close together. It's hardly a 10 centimeter gap in like almost a 5 meter animal. And crocodiles have really good binocular vision. And aside from that, they have a continuous auditory canal. So they have a very specialized auditory system, and it's probably the most advanced among any reptiles. So, contrary to popular opinion, they actually have great hearing, and we've seen this. People who work with them in captivity, of course, all of you have seen. As soon as their keeper goes and calls them over, the animals are very happy to come running. So they have great hearing, fairly great sense of smell, and good eyesight considering the structure of the eye itself. And the critical thing is that they are completely aware of their surroundings while having to expose a very small part of their body outside of the water, which makes it, which is one of the key reasons why they're such effective ambush hunters. Next slide, please. So, talking about the sense organs of crocodiles, crocodiles also have this thing called a third eyelid, colloquially called a third eyelid, but it's actually a nictitating membrane. The nictitating membrane usually deploys when the animals dive, and crudely they're described as like swimming goggles, but they don't actually allow the animal to see very well underwater. It's more to prevent the eye from suspended debris in the water. Crocodiles actually have quite rubbish underwater vision. They can't really see, which is why sometimes when we have to catch them, the animals are inside the water. We can actually just put our hands in and catch them without them turning around to bite the hand, because they don't know what's going on underwater. They don't have very good eyesight either underwater. Next slide, please. Uh, Again, because they're largely semi-aquatic, uh, they have a palatal valve, which is a fleshy flap at the back of the throat that sits against the roof of the mouth. Palatal valve basically ensures that they're not swallowing a lot of water into their stomach or into their respiratory system when they submerge. So oftentimes, if you see crocodiles out on land basking, it doesn't seem like they have a throat at all, but that's because the palatal valve is deployed, and when they swallow, actually the fleshy valve moves out of the way, and then the food goes down their food pipe. But otherwise the valve stays deployed more often than not, so that they can still eat underwater. They just need to raise their head out of the water most of the time, or if they're eating a really small prey item, they swallow it underwater. But typically crocs like to submerge don't like to swallow food when they are submerged. They try and raise their head above water to be able to swallow. Next, please. So again, crocs also have a tongue, though it's attached along the length of the lower jaw itself, so they can't stick their tongue out or use their tongue, say for example, to clean their eyelids like geckos do. But they do have a very fleshy tongue attached along the length of the jaw. The tongue in all true crocodiles contains lingual glands. Lingual glands, they use the lingual glands to be able to excrete salt from the body, excess salt from the body when they're in hypersaline habitats. So these glands are far better developed in true crocodiles. Alligators and caiman barely have any functional lingual glands. So what this means ecologically is that true crocodiles can exist for extended amounts of time in saline or semi-saline habitats. So this is seen in saltwater crocodiles, which, well, they're called saltwater crocodiles for a reason. And even freshwater species like the marsh crocodile, for example, in Goa, they are commonly found in mangroves and brackish habitats. An alligator or a caiman would not survive a very long time in brackish water. After a certain point, they would die of iodine buildup in this because they can't excrete the salt. But true crocodiles can excrete salt, and that allows them to spend extended amounts of time in saline habitats. Next, please. So another interesting feature that all crocodilians have is if you ever have the chance to look at one really close, every individual scale usually has one, if not more, of these small black dots. These small black dots are called dermal pressure receptors or dome pressure receptors. What they basically do is help them to detect minor pressure changes in the water. So if something is swimming by, or if there's a movement of water from one side or the other, that the dermal pressure receptors allows them to sense that pressure. True crocodiles have these DPRs in every scale along the body, so from the tip of the nose to the tip of the tail. Alligators and caiman have these only around the jaw, so that's another difference between. A lot of times people ask what is the difference between an alligator and a crocodile. So one is the jaw shape itself, second is the tolerance to salinity, and the third thing is the presence of these dermal pressure receptors across the body in true crocodiles, and only around the jaw in alligators and caiman. Next slide, please. And another very interesting adaptation that a lot of reptiles have, but it's most pronounced on crocodiles, are these overlapping bony plates on the back and the dorsum. They're called osteoderms. So what these osteoderms basically do is they have two primary roles. One is that they're plates of bone. They can weigh, in large animals, each osteoderm can weigh up to like 200 grams. And under the skin, they sit one on top of the other like this. So it basically provides them armor plating on the back and sides of the body. But what's really interesting is that if you look at the surface of the osteoderm, you can see like all these small pits, right? It looks like there are many craters on the surface. Is that visible to everybody? I don't know how good the image quality is coming through. If you're able to see the small pits on the osteoderms, each of those small pits also contains blood vessels. So in essence, what happens is that crocs can expose their back and their dorsum to a source of heat like the sun, and then they can recirculate the warm blood from the osteoderms to the rest of the body. So it's also a thermoregulatory aid and like a plate of armor for the animal, which is really interesting. And in fact, many people amongst you have also seen this. Crocs can get into huge fights, what would look like almost lethal fights, but they do very limited damage to each other. That's in part because of the presence of these osteoderms. Next, please. So I was telling you earlier when I said that they're able to recirculate warm blood from the osteoderms to the rest of the body. That's possible because crocodiles have a four-chambered heart, which is unique among all reptilians. Reptilians usually have three-chambered hearts, but crocodiles have this connection between the right and the left ventricle that allows them to mix oxygenated and deoxygenated blood outside of the heart. So this basically helps them hold their breath for a really long time. And when they dive, they're able to shunt oxygenated blood from one side of the heart to the other. So this means they can stay underwater for significant periods of time. It's easy to see them stay underwater holding their breath for well over an hour. And that happens because of their unique like cardiovascular morphology. This is unprecedented in any reptiles. They have the most complex circulatory system of all reptilians. Next, please. Because they're semi-aquatic, their forelimbs and rear limbs are also very well adapted. The animal pictured here is actually a gharial. So gharials, but all crocodilians have 5 digits on the forelimb with little to no webbing, and four digits on the rear limb, which are significantly webbed. And each of the limbs have these 3 digits with nails, and the other one is usually if you see two digits on the forelimb and 1 digit on the back limb are almost like vestigial in nature. They're supposed to be able to help the animal sense its surroundings, but they're much less functional than the digits equipped with nails. And these pictures are of a small animal, but large mugger crocodiles sometimes have nails that are 5-8 inches long. This helps them basically dig body pits in loose substrate to be able to thermoregulate. It helps them dig out tunnels. Muggers are well known for making tunnels in the summer to avoid oppressive weather. And also, of course, in females, it helps them dig up soil and substrate to be able to lay their eggs. Next, please. So, since I'd like to talk mostly about behavior, and most of you know broad categories of behavior, but typical maintenance behaviors in crocodiles are activities associated with thermoregulation and osmoregulation. They move between water and land primarily to thermoregulate. Uh, Typically, during cool weather, they'll spend most of their time on land basking, trying to absorb as much warmth as they can because they're poikilotherms. And once they're finished, once they feel that they've basked for long enough, animals move between water and land or between sun and shade. That's the primary activity in most crocodiles. All of you have heard complaints from your respective zoo visitors saying, "ये पत्थर है, जिंदा है कि मरा है, ऐसे ही बैठा है." This is a horrible joke we hear all the time, but that's just the animal doing what its natural behavior is. Uh, a large part of their day is thermoregulation and basking. Aside from that, predator avoidance is an important maintenance behavior in all animals, and feeding. These are the three broad behaviors that crocodiles display in terms of maintenance behaviors. They have a very wide range of social behaviors with lots of visual and chemosensory cues, a lot of vocal cues as well. And reproductive behaviors in crocs were not very well studied, but there are lots of interesting reproductive behaviors, including parental care, courtship. The courtship behaviors vary across species, mating modalities vary across species. Crocs also build typically two different kinds of nests depending on what species of croc it is. And despite what the appearance suggests, they're actually like extremely devoted and dedicated parents. So those are some of the reproductive and post-reproductive behaviors they display. Next, please. So these are just some images. I'm next, please. The video won't play actually because it's not working on my laptop, but I'll share these videos with you all later. Like we were talking about social behavior, so this is a group of Cuban crocodiles interacting with each other. So the animal in the foreground, you can see has its head lifted up a little bit. So that's a submissive gesture in most crocodilians. It is displaying a submissive gesture to the animal who's inflated its body and standing higher up next to it. That's obviously a behavior of dominance. And the smaller animal is lower to the ground and is exposing its throat. The throat actually doesn't have osteoderms. They're not present on the ventral surface in most crocodilians. So exposing the neck is a gesture of submissiveness. So these are like just a snapshot of a social behavior. Next, please. Next, please. The video won't play, but there's a screenshot of the same thing on the next slide. Locomotion obviously is another important aspect of how they get around. We all know crocs are great swimmers, and I'm not going to go too much into the details of how they swim, but they have dorsoventrally flattened tails. So it means that basically just by moving their pelvis and riding the currents, crocs can travel vast distances every day. In fact, there was a study done in Australia in I think the early 2000s where a relocated or a translocated saltwater crocodile, which was moved about 300 odd kilometers from its home range, returned back to that same place in 7 days. So it covered 300 kilometers in 7 days, which means that the animal was moving in excess of almost 40 odd kilometers plus a day. So it's a large amount of space for a heavy aquatic animal to cover. It's a large amount of distance. But most crocodile species can also high walk. You can see this again. This is a Cuban crocodile high walking. You can see that they have fairly long limbs. They are one of the most terrestrial species of crocs. But most crocodilians can high walk over a certain distance, apart from extremely large saltwater crocodiles or Nile crocodiles. Those and adult gharial basically drag themselves along the ground, but otherwise, most crocodile species can high walk effectively for a fairly long distance. And aside from high walking, some of them can even run. So crocodiles are not really well known for that. But could we go to the next slide, please? They're not really well known for running, but many species have been documented galloping. Galloping meaning hind limbs forward, forelimbs backward. The Australian freshwater crocodile and the Cuban crocodile in particular are well known for doing this, using a very mammalian gait when they gallop. But the picture you're seeing, interestingly, is of a Nile crocodile that was scared by a helicopter overhead. So when startled, many species do gallop, especially when they're close to the water and they want to get to the water as soon as they can. You can see that this is a very typical mammalian gait, and they can move surprisingly fast, almost 20 kilometers an hour. though they can't sustain that speed for a very long distance. This when I found out that they could do this, it was very interesting to me, because you don't really associate crocodiles with moving very fast on land, but it's very surprising to see, especially Cuban crocodiles, how they gallop, because they cover distance in a flash. They can cover a large good amount of distance very quickly, much quicker than you would expect from a animal with such short, stubby legs. Next, please. Uh, we were talking about earlier as to how thermoregulation is one of the most important behaviors for all crocodilians. So you can see that during the summer and the winter, their body temperature stays fairly constant. Like, and there's not all that much correlation between between the body mass of the animal and the body temperature. In very small animals, body temperature will be somewhat low, but they try and stay in their preferred every all reptiles have something called a POTZ, which is a preferred optimal temperature zone, which is somewhere around the 30 degrees Celsius, 30 to 35 degrees Celsius range. So in winters, you can see they typically don't achieve the temperatures that they require. And because of that, there's a high amplitude, which means they have to spend a lot of time basking to record even a small gain in body temperature. And if you see the temperature amplitude in the summer, it's very small, because they can warm up fairly quickly in the summer, because by even say 9 or 10 a.m., they're able to achieve the body temperature they need, and they spend much less time basking as a result. Next slide, please. Uh, Feeding is the most important maintenance behavior. All of you probably already know this, but crocs have an extremely varied diet, and all crocodilians have ontogenic shifts in prey preferences. Since we are all in captive management settings, baby crocodiles, we tend to give them chopped fish or small live fish or finely chopped pieces of chicken. But typically in nature, they're eating things like a lot of insects. They eat small aquatic insects, or insects that live in vegetation. They're eating lots of small frogs, small arthropods. So they have a very varied diet when they're small. Once the animals get larger and larger, depending on the species, they will have more far-reaching dietary preferences. But even in big crocodiles like saltwater crocodiles, though this photo is of an American crocodile eating a sea turtle, a good 50 to 60% of their diet is comprised mostly of fish, because fish are their most plentiful prey item. But that being said, they will eat larger prey items, like we see on National Geographic all the time, the Nile crocodiles eating the wildebeest. But that's something that really happens only once a year for them. Aside from that, they subsist mostly on more readily available aquatic sources of food. Exceptions being the gharial, the slender-snouted crocodile, and the tomistoma, which are largely piscivorous, though they have been known to take other prey items, but by and large, they are almost entirely fish eaters. Next, please. Next. One interesting feeding behavior that's seen in many croc species is communal feeding. So this is seen again going back to the migration of the wildebeest and all. Crocs are known to communally feed in many places. Most interesting example of which are saltwater crocodiles. Saltwater crocodiles are not really a communal species. They tend to stay away from each other. But during certain times of the year in the Mary River, they've been observed lining up to catch migrating barramundi. So barramundi are swimming against the tide like salmon, and just like how grizzly bears are known to do, they catch the fish jumping upstream. Big 5 meter saltwater crocodiles that otherwise would not share the same space are seen lining up just with their mouth open, so they can snap at the barramundi that are swimming past. So that's a very interesting behavior, because they're very territorial otherwise. But when they know there's an abundance of food, they put aside their differences for some time, and then they just pig out together. But reproductive behaviors, typical reproductive behaviors, courtship and mating, males do this dominance display called a jaw clap, which is when they raise their head and tail out of the water and slap their jaw. They make bigger animals especially make enough of a subsonic sound when they bellow for the water on their back to dance like this. It's most pronounced in American alligators, as we can see, and that's basically male signaling intent to females. Next slide. So once the males have advertised their dominance, then typically interested females males approach females in the area, and the what you're seeing here is basically a female signaling their acceptance. There's a lot of tactile contact. The animals swim around each other. There's a lot of chemosensory behavior. Crocodiles also have scent glands at the bottom of their neck, here and here. So those scent glands also come into play during the courtship process. So there's quite a lot of posturing and all that happens when the and just before the animals mate themselves. Next slide, please. Typically, the process of mating or copulation or intromission itself happens underwater. So this photo, seeing this on land happens sometimes, but typically only in captive situations. Crocodiles mate underwater most of the time. In natural circumstances, this photo was taken at an underwater display at the Madras Crocodile Bank many years ago. So displays like that actually help observe these sort of unique behaviors otherwise. But basically, males have to turn their body around, and it's very acrobatic. It's not that easy for crocodiles to mate, given that their reproductive organs and their cloaca are at on the ventral side of the body, but they somehow do that. And next slide. About 60 odd days after 40 to 60 days after they mate, females begin the follicles develop into eggs inside the female. And there's two modes of oviposition in crocodilians. Species that live in completely riparian habitats tend to dig hole nests, like the mugger, the gharial. Riverine species typically dig hole nests, and species that live in mangroves and slightly more vegetated areas make mound nests, like you can see in the picture. Along with the mound nests, the animals are also known to make wallows for themselves. So I have a question for you all. Can you see the crocodile in this picture?
No. Yes.
You can see the crocodile in this picture?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, you all are much better at this than I am, because the first time I saw the photo, it took me a good 20 minutes to find the animal. But you can see right along the nest on the right hand side, you can see a part of the tail of the animal sticking out. That trench has also been dug by the animal, so that it has some opportunity to thermoregulate, because female crocodiles actually extremely dedicated parents. They don't like to leave the nest at all. They tend to hang around the nest site for as long as they can. And in nesting sites like this, which are a little further from the water, they dig trenches like this so that water can accumulate and they're still able to thermoregulate while not being too far from the nest. Because eggs are a great source of protein. Like if any of you all are going to the gym, I'm sure you're eating 2 to 3 boiled eggs a day. The situation is the same in nature. There's plenty of predators, feral dogs, monitor lizards that will happily raid a crocodile nest and finish the content. So they're extremely active nest defense is employed by crocodilians. Could you go to the next slide, please? So they make mound nests like this by scraping up vegetation and soil and making a giant pile. Big animals can make mound nests that are almost 1.5 meters tall. The more typical method of nesting is actually hole nesting. You can see a mugger crocodile making a hole nest here. Depending on the size of the animal, the age of the animal, and how reproductively active it is, they can lay anywhere from 15 to sometimes upward of 60 eggs. We've seen big saltwater crocodiles lay 50 to 60 eggs. Same with large gharial. And yeah, so after about a 2-month gestation period, they lay the eggs. Now, next slide, please. And interestingly, in crocodilians, uh, two things: the amount of time it takes for the eggs to hatch and the gender of the offspring that comes out from the egg are both very heavily governed by temperature. So broadly speaking, eggs will hatch quicker at higher temperatures, which is to say that an egg incubated at 32 degrees or 33 degrees Celsius will hatch significantly quicker than an egg hatched at 27 or 28 degrees Celsius. And also, sex determination in crocodiles is almost down to an exact uh, science, if I can use the word. So, for example, this chart is for alligators, but similar graphs are available for many of the crocodilian species. This chart is for alligators and marsh crocodiles. So, you can see that in both alligators and mugger, eggs incubated at under 31 degrees Celsius, and in the case of alligators, up to 31.5 degrees Celsius will produce all females. So you can incubate. I can tell you with the fact that as long as I'm able to maintain the temperature of the egg, I can tell you the gender of the hatchling that's going to come out. But the typical pattern of sex determination, temperature sex determination in crocodilians is F, M, and F. So at lower ends of the incubation temperature spectrum, you'll get a higher percentage of females, and as the temperature increases to a very minute threshold figure, which is usually around 32 to 33 degrees Celsius, you produce a much higher percentage of males, and then once you go above that, the percentage of males starts to drop, and at around 35 degrees Celsius, you'll start producing all females again. Next slide, please. So yeah, so we use a range for incubation because we don't know the ambient temperatures at which they incubate, but between 60 to 100 days later, the hatchlings are fully formed. And hatchlings actually, most reptiles are born with a small egg tooth. So hatchlings make a small slit in the egg and then they start calling out to the parents. This is because crocodile nests, be it a mound nest or a hole nests, are usually about 40 to 50 centimeters underground, and the babies are not capable of digging themselves out of their own nests, unlike sea turtles and all that, which somehow, or unlike other species of animals which can somehow come out of their own this thing, they absolutely cannot come out of the nest there. It's a lot of struggle for them. So the nests are excavated by parents, and usually the females, but oftentimes males have also been observed. In fact, the photo you're seeing is of a male picking up his babies to take to the water. In fact, they even take eggs that have not been broken and roll them along the pallet so that the egg cracks and the hatchling can come out of the egg, and they carry them in their gular pouch to the water. So hatchlings, when they're born, are born with a healthy amount of yolk in their body. So you might have seen at your respective zoos and all that babies look like they have a pot belly. So that's basically a good amount of yolk they've absorbed from the egg, and they can survive on that for about a week to 10 days before they actually actively start hunting. And at that size, like I said, it's small insects, fish fingerlings, and tiny arthropods and all that. That's their diet primarily when they're babies. Next, please. Uh, so yeah, crocs, like I've mentioned before, crocodiles are extremely protective when they're parents. And hatchlings typically stay around the parents for a couple of years, 2 to 3 years. And in captivity, interestingly, the adult crocs have been seen carrying like pieces of meat in the water, and babies taking off pieces of that from that larger piece of meat. Like I said, they don't really chew their food, so they have to spin around and tear small pieces by themselves. And food provisioning for the juveniles has been seen in captivity, though whether it happens regularly in the wild or not is well documented. And because crocs are such apex predators, one of the reasons they also have such a high clutch size, like there are at least 20 to 40 babies born from one female every year. That's because mortality rate in hatchlings is extremely high. At this size, aquatic birds, larger predatory fish like catfish, monitor lizards, other crocodiles, anything can eat a baby crocodile. So for this first 2 to 3 years of their life is extremely a very sensitive and vulnerable phase of their life, and that's why they also live around their parents. But after they're about 3 or 4 years old, there are only two true predators for large crocodiles, which is other crocodiles and humans. Aside from that, they're usually quite bulletproof as far as predators go. uh, Next slide, please. Now I want to this human crocodile interactions or conflict and the conservation of crocodiles itself is something I'd rather discuss with everybody rather than uh, go through slides about it. So this is the last slide that I'm actually showing. Human crocodile interactions are fairly common because humans are dependent on water. It's a critical resource for us, and several species of crocodiles often stray into human habitation, especially during the dry season or during peak flooding season, when water bodies overflow their capacity and animals have access to places that they wouldn't have access to otherwise. And the other side of the coin is when humans are constantly dependent on water, be it for washing their clothes, fishing, all of these activities put people in contact with crocodilians, and attacks happen infrequently, not all the time. So there are crocodile attacks that happen infrequently. Like, to put a number on it, less than 2,000 people a year are attacked by crocodiles. I know 2,000 sounds like a big number, but to give you context, I think every year about 6,000 to 8,000 people are attacked by cows and buffaloes. So crocodile attacks are not really as big a deal in many parts of the world, though in parts of the world with particularly aggressive and territorial species like saltwater or Nile crocodiles, attacks are uh, premeditated. Those larger species tend to look at humans as food, but most of the other species, they're just quick defensive attacks. And they mugger marsh crocodiles, which is our common species, very rarely actually kill people. It's more like territorial bites or defensive bites, not so much predatory attacks. Though large species like Nile and saltwater crocodiles are frequent predators of human beings. They are smart animals. They learn people's schedules. So when people go to the same place every day to say fill water or to wash their clothes, there's a crocodile there that knows that okay, today 9:30 that chap comes at the same place every day to wash his feet or to fill up his buckets of water. And once they start identifying patterns in your behavior, it's only a matter of time before they realize when is the best time to actually attack a human being. But that being said, they are not constant predators of human beings, even though in movies and documentaries we show them as bloodthirsty, hungry, killing machines. The reality is that an adult crocodile needs something like less than 300 calories of food a day. They can, that's their survival quantity of food, is 300 calories. So they can go months and months and months without food. So if a crocodile eats a large prey item, it's not going to bother hunting again. Maybe for a, if it eats something like me, I'm like 75 kilos. So if a crocodile eats me, it's happy for the next 6 months probably without having to eat anything. So while they are dangerous animals, the danger is much more amplified due to media and all that. Snakes are really dangerous. 60,000 people die of snake bite a year. Crocodiles not as dangerous as we'd like to think. And as far as the conservation of crocodiles go, this is something I'd like to have a discussion with everybody. Is that okay, Apurva?
Yes, yes.
Yes, it is. So that with that, I'd like to wrap up my presentation. I'm sorry for taking so long and sorry if I was being a bit boring, but
It was
sometime
very
I had.
interesting.
Yeah,
So I would like to ask participants if they have any questions, if they would like any topic or discussion.
yeah. If there's anything you'd like to ask, please do. Otherwise, you can always find me. And
You can unmute yourself or you can write the question in chat box. Everything will be fine. Okay, till that I'll take some questions.
uh,
So like you said, crocodiles have good memory.
yeah,
So muggers, do they really remember for longer time? Like what is their memory span?
that's a good question, and that's not something I can tell you. But they have a capacity to learn. I can't really say their memory span is for these many years, but they observe repetition and patterns. So, like for example, all animals remember to some degree, but like for those of you in your zoos that are doing things like positive reinforcement conditioning, that is basically relying on the animal's memory, right? You show the animal a target, and the animal knows that okay, if I touch this or if I move towards it, I get food. But if you don't do it for a really long time, and like I have personally tried it, after 6 months, the animal still recognize. Does that mean that their memory is 6 months long? It's hard for me to say, but we can be very sure that they do have good memories, and they have a much more vast capacity for learning patterns than we think, because crocodiles look like damn stones, right? They're just sitting there, mouth open, mouth closed, swimming. So you don't attribute intelligence to that animal per se because of its visual appearance. But the reality is that they are just as smart as other animals, if not smarter, because you see a lot of, like, there was a hypothesis that crocodiles use tools to attract prey. I'm not really sure how practical that is, but they are smart animals. They are capable of learning a lot of things, and they do have a fairly good memory.
This I asked because I was curator in PCMC school. So there we had one crocodile that created my interest in crocodiles. So this is another question. If one keeper continuously feeds the crocodile, if the keeper
Yeah.
changes, is there a change in intake or is the
No,
aggression?
yeah, they might not respond well to new people, because crocs have great hearing, right? So, like, I worked at my previous workplace, I was there for like 11 or 12 years almost. and if I walk past an enclosure and call the animal, every single animal would come out. Whereas I work elsewhere now, so if I get an animal from elsewhere, that animal is not going to recognize my tone of voice. And interestingly enough, it's not only the tone of voice they recognize; they actually recognize phrases, because everybody, that we all work in zoos, right? We all do tours for our guests and all that. So I can be speaking in the exact same tone I'm speaking in now. Crocodiles don't care. They don't bother that, oh, Ajay ka awaaz hai, let's go. That's not what they think. But let's say that crocodile is called Vijay. I'm saying, oh, I love crocodiles. Crocodiles are the best children. Do you like crocodiles? Animal will not respond. But if I say Vijay, instantly the animal will at least turn around and look. And if you say Vijay, come, the animal will come. So it's not like it's just the voice. They also recognize different phrases. And like while working on training crocodiles and all that, we've done historically, we worked on training a lot of species. I still work on positive reinforcement conditioning with a lot of species, and they're capable of understanding a lot of very basic commands without any physical cues. Even words they understand, and very basic movements, subtle movements, like if you bend a little and you want the animal to stop and you reinforce that behavior enough, they know that, okay, you know what, I shouldn't be closer than 1.5 feet to this guy, because then he sends me back to the water. He doesn't give me any food if I go closer than that. But if I stay exactly there, he gives me food. And all animals understand this. This is what we call station training. So I'm only trying to make it, explain it in a way that they're just as smart as a bear, a lion, or a tiger, which you can very easily station train. Crocs are just as smart, and their hearing is just as good. So if the keeper changes, it's the same as many primates or large carnivores. They'll be very skeptical of the new keeper initially, because they don't know the voice, they might not know the smell, or they might not know the working style, right? Like I would work a certain way, but somebody who's worked longer than I have, they might have a different working style. Somebody who's worked less than I have might work differently. Body language would be different. So animals read body language also quite well. They can see your confidence levels and your comfort levels. And if the animal senses you're uncomfortable, they'll take full advantage of it. This is not only crocs, this is true to all animals. So it is, yeah, when the keeper changes, a lot of other things change. It's not only the person, right? It's the familiarity with the animal, the comfort levels, all of that change, and the animals are fairly good judges of that.
And how long does it take for animal to be familiar? Like, how long will it take a new keeper to get familiar to the?
I won't say new keeper per se, but for an experienced keeper to train a new behavior into an animal is a matter of like a few hours. Like a crocodile, for example, that has never been fed by the keeper by hand, can be calmed down to a point where you can feed it by hand within, like, spending less than an hour every day for a week. You can get the animal to calm down almost instantly. And that, again, that's not true only with crocodiles. The time window might vary among species, but all animals familiarize like fairly quickly, even wild caught ones. Because initially when I started in the zoo field, नहीं ये तो जंगल से पकड़ के लाए, ये शांत नहीं होगा. Not only for, it's more for carnivores, but the reality is that if you put in the right amount of uh, time and energy, and you're using the right techniques, it doesn't matter whether it's wild origin or captive bred, they will calm down. That's the reality. They will familiarize, they will pick up new behaviors, they will pick up new, they start learning to respond to new stimuli fairly quickly.
Can you share your memorable experience or a story with crocodiles or alligator?
Lots of memorable experiences and stories with crocodiles, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, I so like I was always fascinated with crocodiles when I was young. Like for some reason, I don't know, some wiring problem when I was younger. So I always liked crocodiles, and just being able to work with them, like there are many experiences. One of our own animals at my previous workplace. That animal had lost a lot of weight. It was being bullied in its enclosure. It was almost skin and bones. Like it was a 12-foot mugger crocodile that weighed like 40, 50 kilos. So we caught the animal to move elsewhere, to move it off exhibit so that we could take some care of it. But it was unbelievable, because that animal that was hardly 50 or 60 kilos in 6 months became 160 kilos. All it needed to do was to be separated from the animals that were bullying it in the enclosures, and hand feed it meaning monitor how much the animal was being fed. And that animal, it was unrecognizable in 4 months, and at the time I was basically that animal's keeper. So that animal and I formed like a fairly very good bond. It was amazing because he just needed to hear the latch of his enclosure opening, and he'd come running to come and take his food ration. So lots of interesting stories like that in the field, even more, walking through crocodile infested waters waist deep, doing night surveys for crocodiles, things like that. Those are all always fun. So yeah, I've had the chance to spend like almost, what, at this stage, almost 14, 15 years working every day with crocodiles. And I've been lucky in all of my professional setting to have worked with, I think, 21 or 22 species of crocodiles, and still you get to learn something new every day. And that's the same for everybody attending this talk as well, right? You can see animals every day, but every day you're learning something from them. And I think we should be very grateful, be it in the field, be it in captivity, for the opportunity to work with such interesting animals. I'm damn grateful for it. So
What are the biggest threats crocodiles are facing, like the population
yeah,
growth?
so in terms of conservation, it's a very it's a very delicate issue, right? Because crocodiles are actually very reproductively active animals. So if their habitat is undisturbed, they don't need any conservation assistance. There just needs to be enough females in the population, and numbers will bounce back ridiculously. In the subcontinent, in the Indian subcontinent, the problem is habitats are dwindling. There's a lot more human interference on habitats, both in terms of hydroelectric projects, dams cut off flow of rivers, they alter river flow courses. Sand mining up in north and central India is a very common thing. That's one of the things that affects the gharial the most, because gharial need the sandbanks to be able to nest in. Not only gharial, but there are three other endangered species of turtles that utilize those sandbanks. So sand mining is a problem. Human interference in the habitat is the biggest problem. So crocs, the most direct conservation intervention they need is just blanket habitat protection. Then the animals take care of themselves. And the best example of that is saltwater crocodiles. So saltwater crocodiles, I think up to about the 1950s or the 1960s, were almost extinct in Australia just because of rampant overhunting. They were almost extinct in Australia in the 1950s and the 1960s. Then they started farming them, which is taking eggs from the wild, growing hatchlings up to a certain size in captivity, releasing them back to the wild. And that was such an unprecedented success that right now they have to catch and kill a few thousand crocodiles every year, or catch and uh, bring into captivity a few thousand problem crocodiles every year, from nearly extinct to a nuisance animal. And that's just by taking human beings out of the equation. So unfortunately, we are the cancer that causes problems for most animals, and it's not very different with crocs also. Take human beings out of the equation, they'll do very well, very, very well. But as long as we are there, altering their habitat or causing problems in their habitat, leaving the habitat untouched really is the only conservation measure. And that benefits us, because if you're leaving your water sources untouched, it allows us to have water for generations to come. Right now, we build high-rise apartments in marshlands without thinking of city drainage. So a lot of our development actions are sometimes short-sighted. Like the city I'm from Chennai, and Chennai floods every year almost now when it rains. Why? Because we've gone and built apartment complexes in every marsh in and around the city. These were the catchment areas of the city. Now they're all gone, and people cry and whine when their basement garages are flooded and their cars are damaged. So as long as our interventions into the habitat are a little bit more well thought out and long term and well planned, then crocs don't really need much intervention from us. That being said, the gharial is still critically endangered. There's a very healthy population in the uh, Gangetic river system, particularly in the Chambal. There's also reintroduction efforts in the river Gandak in Bihar, and a couple of other places. The Chatbir Zoo has introduced some gharial into the BS river system. So the numbers are recovering, but there's no point in letting more animals go into an already disturbed or fragmented habitat. This is my personal opinion. It's uh, not my direct opinion, but animals being released into a fragmented habitat doesn't make sense. If you release a few founder animals into a completely well protected and undisturbed habitat, the conservation will take care of itself. We just need to take a step back and move out of the picture.
So now
So
you said,
usually when I sorry,
continue.
so usually when I do a talk and there are no questions whatsoever, it's either a really rubbish talk or a very good talk. So at this point, I'll give myself the benefit of the doubt and assume that I've done a damn good job. That's why nobody has any questions.
Good talk. I
Anyway,
learned new things. I
yeah,
wanted to ask one more thing. Which species
yeah.
do you think the conservation breeding is needed at this point of time? Since you talked about
Uh,
breeding.
Honestly, of the three Indian species, Gharial could benefit from conservation breeding. Like Gharial already have a lot of conservation breeding initiatives. So I personally wouldn't think that any of the species need conservation breeding. There are mugger might be locally extinct in certain areas. They could be reintroduced there, but they are locally extinct for a reason because of changes to the available habitat itself. So habitat restoration, I think, is honestly more important than
Conservation.
conservation breeding, because conservation breeding alone is not enough. Conservation breeding, habitat protection, and community education sensitization around these habitats, these three things together have to be in place for it to be a successful reintroduction. Nahi to it's just like, oh, dekho, we released 100 babies. What happens to them after 2 years? Nobody knows. It shouldn't be like that. So when all those things go hand in hand, it's a well-rounded reintroduction effort. But as such, yeah, the gharial is really the only species that could actually benefit from robust conservation breeding. The other two are, as far as the IUCN goes, the mugger is vulnerable and the saltwater crocodile across its range is least concern. So there are just so many of them. So gharial being critically endangered is the only species that would actually probably benefit from any reintroduction at all.
End the session right now. And I can proceed with the vote of thanks.
Yeah, I guess so. Thank you.
Okay. That brings us to the end of the enlightening episode of Zooming Conservation. On behalf of our entire team, I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Mr. Ajay Karthik for sharing his invaluable knowledge and insight with us today. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope this episode has inspired you to learn more about crocodiles and get involved with the conservation efforts. Don't forget to join us in our next episode, where we continue to explore the wonders of wildlife and conservation. Until then, tune in. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Uh, Always a pleasure talking about crocodiles.
Yeah, it was a nice session though. Thank you.
Thank you.